Okay, our last presentation is titled Uncovering Implicit Customer Needs for Determining Explicit Product Positioning, Growing Prudential Annuities, Variable Annuity Sales. The paper is written by V. Kumar and Denise Shah, and also by Jack Hirschler from Prudential. And VK and Jack will do the presentation. So please join me in welcoming VK and Jack.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure on behalf of Prudential to have the opportunity to present before you this afternoon and to share with you an innovative tool that we have created at Prudential with the help of Professors Kumar and Shah that really has been institutionalized across our entire variable annuity business in the United States, that's focused on using marketing science to uncover the implicit customer needs for explicit product positioning in the variable annuity products in the United States. I am the Senior Vice President of Strategy for Prudential Annuities. I am on the senior team at Prudential for the U.S. annuities business and report to the President of the U.S. annuities business. I'm also the co-chair of the Marketing Council for all U.S. businesses in the United States, working to make sure we maximize the marketing capabilities of Prudential's business units in the United States. Let me begin by giving a little bit of background on Prudential Financial, one of the largest global financial services companies. And in the United States market, in terms of variable annuity assets under management, at the end of the third quarter, the most recent quarter I can report to you, we had some $75 billion of assets under management in variable annuity retirement products sold through advisors. So we focus on advisor-sold variable annuity products. One point that I want to be very clear about is that this is an industry in the United States that has seen a monumental shift in the focus of products in the last decade to focus not on the old-fashioned annuitization where people turn over their retirement savings to an insurance company for guaranteed income for life, but to a whole new generation of products that use a withdrawal-based mechanism to generate the lifetime income, because we now understand from a behavioral economic standpoint that people feel much better about continuing control of the assets they worked to raise in their working years throughout their retirement, and they were not willing to give up control of those assets at the point that they retire. So we have a whole new generation of product designs rooted in understanding of emotions and sort of behavioral biases. A little bit of a background on variable annuities. Variable annuities are a very popular retirement investment product. In 2009, for the full year, approximately $100 billion will have been deposited into variable annuities in the United States through advisor-sold variable annuities. These products, to understand, are really a combination product. They're a securities product because they're a financial investment. They're also an insurance product because they offer longevity risk protection and also, in this new generation, sequence risk protection for investments in equities and bonds. And this is a market in the United States that is flooded with products and has intense competition with 100+ companies participating. Here's the team that worked together in a collaborative way to do the work about developing this innovative tool that we now use all the way across our variable annuity business at Prudential. I am the head of business strategy and served on this team working very closely with my colleagues here. But the heads of marketing communications in our U.S. annuities business based in Connecticut worked also on this together with our global marketing research team in Newark, New Jersey, Prudential's international headquarters. And they're also our corporate communications executives who helped us in publicizing the creation of this new tool. And then our academic partners all working together as a team to build this new tool at Prudential. So let me talk a little bit about what motivated us to develop this innovative tool that we use today across our business and have used now for years. The key segment that we're focusing on are people we call in the retirement red zone. We've defined this period, and many of you who are from America have seen our television ads that talk about the retirement red zone, the 5-year period before your chosen retirement date through the 5-year period after your retirement date, a critical period in your investment life where 3 critical kinds of risks that we teach people about all come together to create special challenges for people in their overall investment life. Sequence risk, because of the fact that they've got a very short time horizon, especially comes into focus. But also longevity risk. They now have to begin to think about how they're going to make the monies they've amassed in their working years last throughout their retirement. And then finally, and most difficult for us, how do we deal with teaching people about behavioral biases and how that can especially come to play when they have the most money they've likely ever going to have for retirement, all accumulated, and feel most vulnerable to their worst behavioral impulses. So our objective was to grow our variable annuity business in the United States, and our opportunity was to differentiate from all of those competitors who all recognize and talk about behavioral risk, but not very effectively communicating that very important component of the value proposition for variable annuities to this important segment of potential buyers. And our challenge then is, how do you sort of get behavioral risk to be consumed by consumers in a way that really drives growth in the variable annuity business in a demonstrable way? So let me share with you the conventional approach that before we had this tool we used, and I can tell you today most of our competitors continue to use to deal with this whole question about, folks, I need to talk to you about how emotions can play into this decision about whether a variable annuity is right for you. The salesperson meeting with a client has this challenge. He wants to bring up this really important and valid issue that's critical in the decision about buying a variable annuity. But the theories around prospect theory and regret theory, this is difficult for a salesperson to talk to an everyday consumer about. And then when they talk about it, they're talking about all these emotions that people are feeling in the aggregate, and some apply to the person, others don't apply to the person, and it's not very helpful to sort of smooth the sales process. And this whole discussion is easily replicated by any competitor, because anybody can talk about the array of emotions that people could feel in this decision-making process in this important 10-year period of somebody's life. And so we went to work with Professors Shah and Kumar to help us to find a creative, innovative way to get after that. And we needed to use marketing science to help us figure out a new tool that would help us to tackle that. Dr. Kumar.
Thank you, Jack. So as a first step, to blend marketing theory, research, and science, we know we had to set up a stage where a conceptual framework was developed first, and it had 3 stages or 3 phases, we call it. In the first phase, we wanted to uncover the implicit needs. For example, there are many products that look similar. How do you create a meaningful product differentiation? So that can be done if you better understand the implicit needs of the customers. And in the second stage, we wanted to quantify the implicit needs. We wanted to come up with a measurement model and then come up with a scale so that this suitable scale not only measures the degree of implicit needs that reside within each individual, but also is helpful to communicate back to these individuals as to why you're behaving like this and how we can address your product needs. And in the last stage, understanding the degree of these implicit needs and the fact that it varies from individual to individual, we can create a customized product positioning approach and implement that with these individuals, and then ultimately measure the impact of such a strategy. So how do we go about implementing this for Prudential explicitly? In the first stage, to uncover the implicit needs, we conducted focus groups with the help of Prudential experts there, and listened to the investors, the customers, as to what are their concerns in the retirement red zone. Second, we also reviewed the literature, in the behavioral finance literature, the social science literature, the marketing literature, to see what kind of emotions or behavioral tendencies that have been exhibited that we can capture, and so on. Then, based on this, we developed a market survey. And then using the market survey, we will do fact analysis and multivariate techniques to come up with dimensions. But I'll elaborate on that as we go by. In the second stage, we quantified the implicit needs with the help of a measurement model that we built, as well as coming up with a scale specific to this context. And finally, using this specific scale scores, we were able to customize product positioning approach and then quantified the impact of implementing this new tool that Jack talked about, emotion quotient tool, and how much financial impact that Prudential gained, as well as qualitative impact. In terms of the first phase, which is uncovering the implicit needs, we want to ask what emotions influence this investor's decision in the retirement red zone. And we want to broadly define emotions as including attitudes, this behavioral tendencies, feelings, so that it's a broad thing, not a very strict definition of what emotion is. And if you look at what the first step we did here, when we reviewed the literature, we came up with 11 broad set of emotions. And we used 33 measurement items to represent these 11. And we did a survey with 200 sample of investors in the retirement red zone. And we established construct validity by refining that model and coming up with 5 emotions: fear, regret, inertia, aggressiveness, and susceptibility. So these 5 emotions basically represent the implicit needs that reside within these individuals. Now, what we did next is to go to a national sample of 1,008 investors and administer this finally revised instrument to get a distribution of the scale scores that we developed to see how the emotions are distributed in the population. So in order to quantify this implicit needs, we first developed a measurement model, hierarchical Bayesian measurement model. Why Bayesian here in this context? Because we wanted to incorporate individual differences or a heterogeneity that exists at the customer level. And then using this measurement model, we came up with a score, the 6 scale scores called Retirement Emotion Quotient, which basically represents broadly degree of emotions residing within each of these individuals. These 5 emotions that we talked about. And in terms of mathematical, it's the weighted sum of factor scores of each of those. But in layman's term, that says that, are you affected by these 5 emotions? So what was the distribution of this REQ score? If you look at this, the minimum REQ score was about 18, and the maximum was 52. If somebody has a score of 52, all that says is that this person is affected by all kinds of emotions, all these 5 types of emotions. They are in the right tail of the distribution. If they score 18, none of these emotions affect them. But what is interesting is the middle group. For example, if you take a score of 36, how do you interpret that? One first interpretation is that if you look at the percentile, it says 40% of the individuals in the population have a higher degree of emotion than a person who scored 36. So 36 represents broadly the 5 degree of emotions. But the score of 36 could have come from a combination of different set of emotions. Somebody could have a higher level of fear, but lower levels of all other emotions, still have a score of 36. Some other individual can have regret as the highest score. For example, here, you look at Fred. Fred has got 100% aggressiveness, and regret is 92%. Basically, aggressiveness and regret dominate for Fred. Whereas Martha has a fear and inertia as the dominating emotions. Yet, both of them have a score of 36. So how do we capture these differences in these individual emotions? So we came up with this measure called percentage individual emotion score, which basically captures the degree of each of these emotions residing within this individual. And for example, to capture Martha's inertia score, you look at what score she's had on the inertia scale items, divided by what is the maximum possible score that Martha can get. And in this case, it is 8/16, therefore 50% is what you see as being reflected in Martha's. So here again, same score, but 2 different emotion profile. So in order to implement this in Prudential, we developed an EQ tool, which I will ask Jack to talk about it. Jack?
Thank you. So this tool is delivered through a secure website that we use for investment professionals, and we have some 60,000 investment professionals at the time that we launched this, now about 90,000 investment professionals who access the secure site. In 2009, somewhat over 1 million visits to this site and the secure site only by investment professionals, where marketing support is provided and information about their clients' accounts is provided. And this tool is a central piece of an important campaign that we'll talk about at Prudential. And so I want to share with you the pieces that an advisor will see when they go to the EQ Toolkit piece of our website to help support this. And then we'll get into some other marketing materials and as part of our 360-degree marketing around this whole initiative. So the first piece, of course, is the survey instrument itself. Then, of course, the report out to the customer instantly of what their results were, both on the EQ and the PI scores. We don't call it that for the client, but that's what that is. And then finally, a group of tools that we've created for the investment professionals to help them when they sit down with the client to talk about how to position variable annuity products from Prudential with our guarantees that directly get to the specific individual client emotions. This is the difference between the competitors and us. The individual client specific emotions that are driving them and they would be most susceptible to and therefore most protected by our guarantees with. So here's the page that the advisor first gets to on this retirement EQ segment of the secure site. You can see on the left side that the menu allows them to fill out the questionnaire right now, right here. After doing that, they could get the results. But very often, these advisors want to mail a printed version of this thing, collect it back from the prospect, enter it themselves, and then when the appointment happens to sit down and have a discussion, potentially about a variable annuity, one piece of that sales process becomes the results of this questionnaire to get not at the sequence risk, not at the longevity risk, but at the behavioral risk piece of that sales presentation. Here is, in sequence, I'm going to show you the 4-page report that a client is going to get based on having completed their questionnaire that's available online here. First of all, this report is going to explain that, look, everybody has emotions. Emotions play a part in all of our lives, and emotions can lead us to behave in ways that are counter to our best interests. And then we talk about what is the emotion quotient program, what's it designed to do. Then we talk about why this is important, especially for people in the retirement red zone, to be aware of their emotional biases. And then we show them their EQ score. In this case, an individual had an EQ score of 45. Then on the next page, we don't call it the pies, but here what we're showing are the 5 emotions and the score that this particular individual got, showing in this case that, that regret is the dominant emotion this person is most susceptible to. And in this particular situation, the financial advisor is going to want to emphasize this particular emotion in the solution set that they're going to be recommending from Prudential, the kind of guarantees around retirement income that our product might provide for them. And the recommendation is, on one hand, you might want to read our report on this research that we did with 1,000 Americans where we developed the EQ program. And most of all, you need to meet with your investment professional to talk about how your particular behavioral impulses may adversely influence your ultimate retirement results in your financial affairs. So let me talk about how this was now implemented with the investment professional. Now in the third piece of the tools on that website that I just talked about. And remember Fred's profile, because I'm going to use Fred as just an example here. Here's a fellow who's really strong on aggressiveness as an issue for him. And not too surprisingly, he's so aggressive, he often deals with regret issues around his aggressiveness. And that's a combination that's not an uncommon one. And so here is what we offer on our website for the advisors. For each one of these emotions, we have developed essentially a key for them with key points to talk about with clients if you have a client who's scored high on aggressiveness. So here this thing is available on the website. You've got a client that's strong on aggressiveness, and this report says your client's taking the survey, they're high on aggressiveness. You need to take a closer look at this, and we're going to suggest to you key points that you should be emphasizing, because you can be sure this is a fellow, for example, who's always aiming to reach for performance. He's always wanting to tap into great opportunities. And so when you're presenting a variable annuity product from Prudential with one of our state-of-the-art lifetime withdrawal guarantees, focus on the fact that a Prudential product offers a highest daily value guarantee, so that the income that the person will get will be based on the highest daily value their retirement savings ever reached. That's an important point for an aggressive person. For a regret person, the corollary piece like this for regret will say, point out for the person that we lock in that highest daily value, for example, and that's something that affords protection so you won't feel regret later on that you sort of wrote it up and wrote it back down again. So it's a little bit of a different point in positioning product. Sometimes it might suggest a different one of our products might be a better alternative for a client. Sometimes it's more about the positioning of the product to be most effective to speak to the particular client's needs. How did Prudential market this EQ tool? Well, we created the research report I alluded to earlier called Behavioral Risk in the Retirement Red Zone. It summarized our study of 1,000 Americans who are in the retirement red zone and their own emotional biases so that people could read about this and understand that everybody feels some degree of emotion. We did training seminars as we unveiled this, and we did over 100 of these seminars that were attended by some 2,000 financial advisors across all of our distribution channels across all of the country. And we also provided technical support. We have an e-marketing support team that travels around to the road shows we do in hotel ballrooms with investment professionals and teaches them how to use the secure part of our website to its maximum, especially this EQ tool, which is central to our Retirement Red Zone national campaign. And finally, of course, we do press releases. So here's where those folks from our global marketing communications folks come in. They're press releases to the media to get media coverage. And I invite you to look on Google and see the kind of coverage for years now that Prudential has gotten with this Retirement Red Zone campaign and this EQ tool. And of course, we also did a webinar to introduce this to the marketplace. And as I show you a quick little snippet of video from this webinar, not only the webinar, but pay attention that the senior executive who's sort of leading our discussion on the internet webinar is the chief marketing officer, not of the annuities business, Prudential's life insurance business. A separate business unit of Prudential is promoting and talking about this because of the spillover effect on our other Prudential American businesses with this program. Here's the video.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mark Hugg, Chief Marketing Officer for Prudential's Life Insurance Division. Thank you for joining us today at this educational webinar entitled Behavioral Risk in the Retirement Red Zone. I want to welcome our live audience here in Shelton, Connecticut, our viewers, as well as our panelists, whom I'll introduce momentarily. The purpose of our program today is threefold. First, we want to summarize the findings of Prudential's new study on behavioral risk for investors in the retirement red zone. Second, we'd like to discuss how that behavioral risk can impact a person's retirement investment decisions. And third, we'll discuss the important role that a financial professional can play in helping retirement investors mitigate the effects of that behavioral risk. To help us do that, we've gathered an esteemed panelists of experts here who've been working on this research project for the past year.
I don't know about esteem, but we were there. So right now what I'd like to talk about is for the three audiences, the critical audiences that really were impacted by this tool. Let's go at them systematically. I'm going to talk about the financial planners and the customers and prospects, and I'd like to turn over to VK to talk about the impact for Prudential.
Thank you. Let me attempt to demonstrate the impact EQ tool has had on Prudential's financial performance. To demonstrate that, we used multiple methods. Here I'm going to demonstrate one method so that we can deep dive into that. We model Prudential's variable annuity sales as a function of firm-specific factors, industry, and macroeconomic factors. In fact, the first variable annuity sales is a function of certain set of variables. So you have the advertising, you have the number of products, which is firm-specific, unemployment rates, S&P 500. All those variables belong to the class of those three. We used a broad set of variables. I'm just showing you a representative set of variables there. And the approach was that we had 48 data points total. First 35 months where the EQ tool was not launched, we built the model so that we can forecast out for the next 13 months as to if they had continued with the same marketing strategy, what would have been the predicted sales, and then compare it with the actual sales because it is after the launch of the EQ tool. So in order to talk about the fit, here is what we show the actual and the predicted sales. It closely follows. Again, a lot of usual statistical maneuvers you do in terms of trying various model forms, but ultimately resulted in a MAPE of 6%. Then we take this model and assess the EQ tool impact, which is the difference between the actual and the predicted. variable annuity sales in the period subsequent to the introduction of the EQ tool. And if you look at that graph, clearly you see the red line, which is the predicted sales, and the blue line is the actual. And the actual always exceeds the predicted, indicating that definitely there was an impact after the launch of the EQ tool. While you see the gap to be small, the y-axis is in billions of dollars. So, so it's just not a minuscule gain, it's a substantial gain, and this gain will amounts to anywhere between 455 to 480. Why we have the range? Because we use a Bayesian model to estimate this, to capture the uncertainty in the parameter estimates. Therefore, you build a confidence interval around this prediction, and you see that confidence interval between 455 and 480 million dollars. So clearly, just in the first year after the introduction, this is the gain. It is not a discounted cash flow, but it is the actual value. Then if you add up the few more years, then you will see that additional benefit that Jack will attribute to. Here it is, Jack.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let me talk a little bit about the customers and the investors in this product and what this tool really did for them. Well, certainly it helped them to learn more about their behavioral impulses. And I think the best way to demonstrate that is, as we launched this, we talked about the survey we did with 1,000 Americans. In that survey, first we talked to them about whether they believed they were vulnerable to emotions. These are all people who are in the retirement red zone by definition. And 60% of them said, no, I don't have emotions playing any part in my retirement investing. And then we put them through the survey, and they did the EQ, and then we found out from them that 75% of the very same people said now that they would be interested in learning something about a guarantee that might protect them from their behavioral impulses that they had just a moment before learned about. So we felt like this clearly demonstrated that awareness and then translating into potential opportunity for Prudential. For financial planners, and these are relatively recent quotes from people who produce it. Here's a sales executive in California who says this is an invaluable tool in her practice. And here's a sales training person in an organization saying that the EQ tool for all of the people that are producers that they do training on annuity products and proper annuity sales says this is an engaging way to bring the concept of behavioral finance to life in really what they're saying in an individualized, personalized way that makes a real difference. Interestingly, and I mentioned this being on Google a lot, that's because it's become viral. Here's an example of a credit union in Arizona called Canyon State Credit Union that sells Prudential variable annuities products and also publishes their own newsletter to their own credit union members, who's promoting Prudential's retirement red zone and talking about the EQ and emotions causing consumers to react to market uncertainty in ways that are detrimental to their financial interests. So we've begun to see pickup by broker-dealers who are unaffiliated with Prudential really running with the retirement red zone story. So here's how we feel the impact has been on Prudential itself. Well, certainly customer-centric, individualized positioning of the need around the emotion piece, the behavioral finance piece of the overall 3 risks in the retirement red zone, really critical and differentiate Prudential's presentations of variable annuity from any competitors, and we monitor them closely. So you end up with a conversation that looks more like this. Let me talk to you. You've already done the EQ. Let me talk to you about what we found about fear and inertia being concerns for you. And the client's thinking, hopefully, the percentage pies results are that she saw from having done the survey. And here's how we think in summary about how this thing has really worked for us. On the product positioning, before this, we presented this issue around behavioral risk as an aggregate issue. Now we're able to do it at an individual customer level. We were before responsive. We sat down the meeting and found out what the customer thought about this whole issue. Now we're proactive. We're finding out what emotions are driving them before we sit down to have the sales presentation conversation, which means that we're not just satisfying express risk at the point of sale. We're actually examining, uncovering, finding latent and unarticulated needs before the sitting down to talk about annuities, which is a much better way to collaboratively solve for the client's needs. We found that our sales, while outperforming competition before we introduced this in 2007, outperformed competition by 11%, outperformed competition by 19% after that, and as BK mentioned, something like $450 million of sales lift in a time period where we did somewhat $13 billion of sales in that window period. Let me talk a little bit about the long-term impact very quickly. We received an award for the 5th year in a row for our guarantees around lifetime income at Prudential from a magazine that is read by financial advisors in all distribution channels. But most exciting, this year for the first time, we won an award for marketing, pointing out this year, years after we introduced this now, that we are best at providing information about explaining the difference, how emotions can really play into investment decision making around retirement. And very importantly, we have now, in the most recent quarter, I'm allowed to share with you, from number 5 in sales of variable annuities, in the quarter before we launched the EQ tool to the most recent quarter, we've risen to number 1 in sales with some $5.5 billion in sales and far outpacing the next competitor, MetLife. And we're just about out of time. We have dreams of expanding this into being more of an index approach. We're also talking to AARP about potentially looking at younger age cohorts than the people in the retirement red zone with this tool. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Ruth and Gary, you guys are in charge of asking questions on this round.
Well, first of all, thank you for a very interesting presentation. And for, I think, all of us, even if we're not yet in the retirement red zone. I'd like to pick up on that sort of wonderful result that you just presented, where you grew from number 5 to number 1. That's pretty exciting. Were there any other factors going on in the marketplace that would account for that, as opposed to, how much can you sort of allocate to the effort?
And we're talking about a time period from 2007 through now going into the beginning of 2010. Clearly, the momentum that we got with the introduction of the Retirement EQ and the Retirement Red Zone campaign gave real vitality to the Prudential brand, which is already an iconic brand. There's spillover. We didn't anticipate the financial crisis, but the momentum that we had with the EQ program and really addressing the sort of the 3 important risks that reps needed to talk to clients about only became more pronounced as we got into this financial crisis, as I'm sure you can imagine. And so clearly, there are other factors going in. I guess our suggestion is that this kind of lift that we saw feels right to us, some 4% lift in sales attributable to this, and clearly help give us the momentum to drive towards our number 1 ranking.
If I can just follow up, it's interesting you talk about the spillover effect, because if I understand it correctly, really the EQ tool and the PIEs was developed to refine your communication strategy. It wasn't actually used to direct folks to different products. Is that correct? It was really to communicate about the same product, in different ways.
We have an array of variable annuity products.
Yeah.
We actually have different kinds of guarantees. Some people are more focused on protecting their account values. Other folks are more focused on guaranteed income. And so the tool actually is very useful for picking the right core variable annuity product, and also helpful in determining whether there is a risk or concern at all about income, and whether maybe a guarantee around protecting their retirement savings account value is more appropriate for the client.
Let me go back to a very interesting and very impressive piece of work. But as I was listening to you, I mean, what is different about your work from the kind of thing that we would teach in a class on standard scale development? You made some claims, I think, about some uniqueness about your methodology. Can you share with us what's unique about this approach?
Yeah,
just happened to have.
Just happened to have. The standard approach for this in the variable annuity industry is to talk about this in terms of risk tolerance. So risk tolerance questionnaires have been around for a very long time, and our competitors talk in general terms around the issues. And anticipating your question, I actually brought along an example from a competitor actually based here in Boston that uses emotions, but has a piece that talks about emotions, but talking about it in the context of asset allocation. There's nothing personalized about any particular client in this piece, and that is much more the norm. Nobody yet has copied this idea of personalizing the discussion around the role that different emotions play for different people. In fact, in couples, different people.
Well, let me follow up on that because that was a great answer to a question that I don't think I asked.
Okay.
The question that I think I asked was a more technical one about just the development of the EQ and the PIES scores. And which is to say nothing bad about sort of standard market research practice, but is there anything about that was not, in a sense, that you would not have gotten just by doing whatever off-the-shelf methodologies available?
Well, the approach we took, I think the approach we followed was very interesting because, first of all, it's easy, right, to really know what are the implicit needs. You do a standard questionnaire, send out the survey, and you find that out. I think a lot of companies that do branding also try to find out, right, what are the emotional factors driving the brand. But then what next, right? What do we do after that? How do we translate that into a strategy with which you can position your products in a way that is meaningful for both the customer and turns into a win-win strategy for not only the client, but also the firm. So that was the piece which, we had to do a lot of thinking. And we applied the best methods out there, to make those things happen.
Okay.
I'm curious. A number of the presentations we've been asking about, the portability of what the work that's carried out. And in this particular case, I think you have a challenge because emotions are very context specific. And so the question is, not only is there transportability into, say, other industries or firms that might want to apply it, but even at different points in time, I'm wondering the extent to which people's emotions change. We know that customers' preferences actually change, so why not emotions too? And have you thought something about this?
You want to answer?
Chuck, you can take and I can follow up.
About time, longitudinal leakage.
Yeah, so I rushed through because the clock was ticking there, but the 2 points that we're very interested in pursuing further is to do longitudinal work in mass to study whether and maybe there can even be an index that tracks for people in the retirement red zone throughout time. Do those people do exactly what you described? Do they have ebbs and flows in certain emotions? Do certain economic situations, like the one we just went through, lead to different kinds of emotional impulses becoming more prevalent in those periods, and do they fade? And could that be interesting, frankly, to the media to write about how that works over time? The other piece that we're very interested in, and actually talking to AARP about potentially working together with them on, because they're interested in younger people who will be joining AARP in the future, is how about the 40-year-old age cohort, a little younger than the one that we're focused on in this work? Do they tend, just in general, to have different emotional impulses that are more prevalent because of the attained age that they have reached at that point?
Regarding transportability,
Yeah. No. Do you want to also know about transportability across industries or just over time?
We have a general question about transportability. So talk to us about transportability.
Sure. I mean, any firm, or any industry where there is not enough meaningful product differentiation, I think this framework can be generally applied, where you try and uncover implicit needs as in your phase one, and then try to have some meaningful scale that you communicate to your client and have a product positioning strategy that addresses those needs. Now the question is, where would it be more effective? And when we were doing this study and we were researching, we realized that it becomes more effective when the process of uncovering those implicit needs has some kind of an adverse impact on the client in terms of by the process, like when the investors know that these are their emotions, that are resident, that they may not be fully aware of, if they are not mitigated by having a Prudential product, then it can lead to some kind of an adverse reaction for them. So, if you look at industries, maybe you can take healthcare as an example, where medical non-compliance is one of the issues, that is facing healthcare companies or drug companies. And so what are the reasons? What could be the implicit reasons why a consumer does not take drugs on time? Is it carelessness? Is it forgetfulness? Or is it that he's fearful that if he keeps taking drugs, it may have some adverse reaction in the long run? So if those things can be uncovered and then communicated back to the consumer, and then you say, okay, now that we've uncovered and both of us are on the same page, here is a product that can mitigate that. I think it would be a great way to not only have a positioning strategy, but also address some of the consumer welfare aspects.
In fact, if you research the literature, the media in Google, you'll see that the reason they don't take customers usually say time. I don't have time. But that's like a camouflage, like is hiding the emotions rather than saying the true reason. They say I don't have time is one of the reasons that is being stated. So as we were researching in terms of while writing the paper.